Okay. Today I have a really, really special guest, Jeffrey Deskovic, and he has a tremendous story about him committing several crimes. And then he turned out to be he was completely innocent at the age of 16. And I would love to hear your story. And I think everybody out there needs to hear the story because I saw an interview of you and I was compelled. I could not stop watching it, which is why I contacted you to come on my show.
Yeah, so when I was 16 years old, I was arrested for a murder, which I did not commit. The year was 1990, and we're in Peekskill, which is Westchester County, New York, so it's the suburbs.
Okay. So why don't you give us a rundown? Who was the person that was murdered?
Her name was Angela Correa, and she was a classmate of mine in high school. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high-buy basis.
Right. And what school was this?
Peekskill High School.
Okay. So why don't you just basically give us the whole story, give us the whole rundown.
Sure.
Whatever happened, tell us what happened to the girl, and then tell us how you got roped into this, please.
Sure. So one of her classes was a photography class, and the professor assigned the class to take pictures of foliage, and he had assigned like a buddy system. He paired the male students with the female students, and so after school, she walked with her sister back to her house. Her sister went in the restroom, and when she came back, Angela had left, and she went to Hillcrest Park to take the pictures. There was a wooded area that connects the Hillcrest School with some apartment condominiums. There's like a path of woods, and the male student played hooky on the assignment, so he wasn't there. And she had the misfortune of coming across a drug addict who was 29 years old. She's 15. I'm 16. So she comes across him on this path. He's sitting on a rock and he's high, and he attacks her. He rapes her and he murders her.
Jesus.
And her body goes missing. And so this created a big thing. I mean, there was newspaper article. There was announcement made on the school PA system. Did anyone see her? That kind of thing. And then a few days later, her body was found in that wooded area, naked from the waist down. So it created kind of an atmosphere of fear, rumor, paranoia. There were town hall meetings held, and safety tips were given, and updates on investigation were provided. I got on the police radar because the police interviewed a lot of students from the school, and some of them told the police that they might want to talk to me because I was kind of quiet into myself in high school and I didn't quite fit in. And I guess their thinking was people that don't fit in or commit heinous crimes. So that's the kids' thinking, and they pass this on to the cops. So now I'm on their radar.
Okay.
I was a sensitive teenager. This was my first real brush with death, and so I had an emotional reaction to it. And to the police, that was suspicious. You know, they thought, well, your emotional reaction is disproportionate to what your actual relationship is. So they viewed that as some sort of outward sign that I was sorry for or what I had done. But I want to point out that this really shook up the whole city of Peekskill to the point that free mental health counseling was provided. So in a lot of ways, I wasn't really all that different from other people.
Okay. And this was, what year was this?
This is 1990.
Okay. All right. Continue.
So a reinforcing factor is that the police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the actual characteristics, to have the actual psychological characteristics of the perpetrator. And I had the misfortune of matching that. So a type of reinforcing factor. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would speak to me as a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me like my opinion was correct. I wanted, before I was a teen, while I was still pre-teenage years, I wanted to be a cop when I grew up. So that storyline, along with my age being 16, kind of roped me in. I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life, and that intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique.
Of course.
So I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. So that went on for about 6 weeks. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. I said, look, we got some new information in the file. We want to share that with you, and that'll allow you to be more helpful to us. But first, you have to take and pass this polygraph result. And so the next day, rather than report to this high school, I went to the police station. And instead of giving me the exam at the police station, they drove me across county lines about 40 minutes away by car, which meant I wasn't able to leave anymore on my own. I was dependent upon the police. I had 3 cops that came with me from Peekskill, including the cop who was pretending to be my friend. They put me in the car to ride with him. But then there was the polygraphist, who was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, Daniel Stevens. But he was dressed like a civilian, and he never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. He gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I figured, well, I'm here to help the police, so what does it matter?
Now, when you were doing all this, where was your mom? What was your mom's opinion of all this?
She was working. She had no idea that anything was wrong.
Oh, okay.
It was a school day, and she thought I was in school, and she had no idea that I had been regularly meeting with the
Oh, I
cops.
see. You never told her. Okay. I'm sorry. Continue.
It's okay. So I didn't understand the brochure. I figured, well, I'm there to help the cops anyway, so what does it matter? Just get on with it. I didn't have an attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. And then from there, he put me in a small room. He gave me countless cups of coffee in order to get me nervous.
Right.
And then from there, he attached the polygraph machine to me, and then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Wow. Yeah, it was a long time. And in each hour it passed by, my fear increased in proportion to the time. And eventually he said, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear through the roof. And then the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me. He had been holding them off, but he couldn't do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he said, look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I mean, I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else knew where I was either loomed quite large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. And then there was this push-pull dynamic. I mean, the possibility of harm, this false life preserver he gave me. So I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based on the information which he'd given me in the course of the investigation. And in the 6 weeks run up, in the course of the interrogation, and in the 6 weeks run up to that. Towards the end, he said, at the end, I was just desperate to get out of there. I wasn't thinking about the long term. So I just made up a story based on what he told me in the course, what he told me, and that, I just incorporated that into a story. And I wound up just collapsing on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. And obviously I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
Wow. I can't imagine how a police officer, knowing that you're innocent, can do that and live with themselves. That just blows me away. You have to be not human as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's just unbelievable. So you're arrested, and what happens from there? Where were you put when they arrested you that day?
Well, they brought me to the police station, and then they brought me to the county jail from there.
Okay, and then from the county jail, what was the steps that were taken before you were sentenced?
Sure. So I was in the county jail for about 35 days, and then I got bailed out. The judge set bail, and my mother had a boyfriend who was a businessman, and he was able to bail me out. So I there was a pre-trial hearing. Before the trial started, the DNA test results came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen found in the victim didn't match me. But they continued to prosecute. The prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to commit perjury. He claimed, once the DNA didn't match me, he claimed that he remembered that he forgot to write down medical evidence that he claimed showed that the victim had been promiscuous, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that that was how the DNA didn't match me, that, she was sleeping around, and that she must have slept around with somebody before I murdered and raped her.
Dear God, man.
And then he took it a step further, and he names he didn't get a DNA sample from him, nor did he even call him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury.
Okay.
And he got away with that because, the victim's family wasn't coming to court, so they had no idea what was being said about her in the courtroom. And then also my lawyer allowed him to, get away with it by essentially not defending me. He never called my alibi as a witness. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to challenge the confession, to argue that proved the confession was coerced and false. He literally never cross-examined the medical examiner. He never called that other youth as a witness or asked him to give a sample, just to explode the consensual sex theory. And, he really should have never represented me because of a conflict of interest, because this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of Westchester County Legal Aid, and specifically by the officer who was the attorney who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. So that conflict prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. And in terms of the confession, it was not videotaped. It was not audio taped. There was no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And when they came to court, they left a threat and false promise out of their story. Sometimes when you defend a case where there's a false confession, you have to answer the confession. You have to explain it. You have to try to disprove it. And you bring it all together in your closing argument. But he didn't do that. He wouldn't allow me to testify. And sometimes he argued to the jury the confession never happened. At other times, he argued to the jury that it did happen, but that it did happen, but that it was false. And at still other times, he argued that it was coerced. So he was just throwing things against the wall. And you can't do that, or you're not going to have any credibility. You have to come up with a theory, and you stick with it. So that was my inadequate defense. The victim's bra was entered into evidence by the prosecution, and the jury asked to see the bra, and that was important because one of my statements that they coerced from me was, I said that I ripped her bra off, but the way that some bras are made, you can't rip them off. So when the jury asked to see the bra, that's when the judge said that the bra and other clothes had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and that the janitors thought it was garbage, and so they threw it out, and so it wasn't available any longer.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was prejudicial. And the other thing is that even though polygraph test results are not admissible in court because it's not scientific, and it's definitely prejudicial. The judge came up with a backdoor rule, and he said that, well, because the statements were made in the course of the polygraph, he allowed the polygraphist to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph, that I lied when I denied committing the crime, while prohibiting my lawyer from asking him questions about the methods he used to arrive at his opinion. And the last thing was the jury sent out a note, and they asked if on the third day of deliberation, they sent out a note, and they asked, well, if we can't come up with a verdict, are we going to be kept sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes. And at that point, I learned many years later that the vote was 11-1. but there was one holdout juror that was not convinced, but everybody was pressuring him. And when that answer came back on the note, um, that ratcheted up the pressure. And so nobody wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday, including him. So he switched his vote. And as a result of that, I was wrongfully convicted and given a 15 to life sentence because I had been charged as an adult and sentenced as an adult.
So they gave you basically a public offender, is that right? Defender, rather?
Yeah, they gave me a public defender. That's right.
Okay. And what was the reason that you couldn't get your own lawyer? Was it financial?
It was financial. So, for example, we went to my mother and I went to see one lawyer, and he wanted a $50,000 retainer,
Wow.
and we
Yeah.
just simply didn't have money like that.
Yeah. I mean, most people today don't have money like that.
I agree. They don't.
Wow. That's just unbelievable. Why do you think they were so hard pressed to convict you? Because it did not. I mean, the judge, the police, even possibly the public defender. It looked like they were just had this target on you, and they needed to find you guilty, but nothing adds up. Why do you think they felt the need to do this?
I think there was a lot of public pressure. I think. I mean, I think in terms of on the police to solve the crime. I know that the victim's family had went to the state police and asked them to take over the investigation, but they didn't do that. But I think that created additional pressure on the police to make an arrest. I think it was pressure on the prosecutor to get a conviction. I mean, it was a very high profile. I think it was a very high profile case. I think that played a big role in everything.
And they didn't care about your well-being or your family or anything like that. They just needed the conviction.
Exactly.
Wow. And how old are you at this point?
I'm 17 at this point.
Wow. Okay. So you're sentenced to 15 to life.
Right.
And walk us through, the first couple of days where you're brought to prison.
Yeah, I remember being in handcuffs and having a chain around my waist and having my legs fastened together and fastened to the legs of the prisoner on the bus next to me. I remember how large the prison wall loomed, how menacing the barbed wire appeared. It was definitely a frightening situation. I was in a men's maximum security prison because I had been tried and sentenced as an adult. So
Why did they, sorry to cut you off, why did they do that? Why did they try you as an adult if you were 16?
No, I mean, they have a law that says that if for certain crimes such as murder, they have the option to choose to charge you as an adult.
Okay, did not know that. Okay, sorry about that. Continue.
It's okay. No, it's a good question. So, I mean, I have a target. I'm 17 years old in a men's maximum security prison. I'm convicted of a sex offense, which, there's a vigilante mentality in which people are convicted of sex offenses. It's very violent there. 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There was gang activity. There was violence that didn't involve weapons. So it was a very dangerous overall environment. They had a system of maintaining order in the prison. If you were found guilty of breaking a prison rule, then they would keep you in the cell 23 hours a day. They would send you less food. Sometimes it would be 3 or 4 days old. You take 2 showers one week and 3 the next, rather than being able to shower daily as the rest of the population. Could not purchase food or items or hygienic items while you were on that status, and you couldn't use the phone, and you would be limited to 1 hour a day recreation in a small caged area. So in the course of my incarceration, it was different times where I was beat up, and it was, one time I nearly lost my life. But beyond dealing with that physicality, I was subjected to those sanctions because, as far as the prison was concerned, if you were trying to fight back, then that obviously means that you were fighting. Food was terrible. Sometimes it was burned. Other times it wasn't fully cooked. A lot of the guards were not professional. They were verbally abusive. Some were really dangerous. Others were kind of negligent in their duties, so they might walk in the opposite direction when violence was occurring. This way, they don't have to break anything up or file paperwork afterwards.
Okay. Now, when the first couple of days that you were in there, did you still have hope? Like, no, I'm innocent. I'm going to get out of here. This is not my future.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That lasted for about 15 years. So
Wow.
I lost. So in my mind, I wasn't doing a 15 to life sentence. I thought I was just doing a year or two till the next appeal would be decided, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still believed in the system.
Right, right, right.
So I lost. I thought I naively thought the court system got better the higher up you went, but it didn't work that way. My I lost the direct appeal, the first appeal. My lawyer argued that my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated by the way the cops questioned me. She argued that I was innocent based on the DNA. She raised the issue of the evidence being thrown out, the polygraphist being allowed to tell the jury that I failed the polygraph. She raised the issue of the judge being biased. So there were 10 issues that were argued. The appellate court wrote that I was free to come and go as I wanted, so they didn't consider that my rights were violated. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which I don't get because the DNA didn't match me. And they got rid of all of my issues, other issues in one sentence. They wrote they looked at the rest of my issues and found them either to be without merit or else not preserved for review. And they ruled against me 5-0 on that. And it was all downhill after that.
Okay.
They denied the re-argument motion in one word. Denied. They denied my application to go to the Court of Appeals. They just wrote that they were declining to give me permission. I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure. So my legal paperwork arrived 4 days too late, which the district attorney's office argued that the court should just rule I was late and not get to my issues, which is what the court did. Now I was stuck arguing that procedural issue, and I appealed that ruling to the Federal Court of Appeals. The judges were Rosemary Pooler and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And my lawyer argued that this was not a delay caused by me or my attorney, but by the misinformation by the court clerk. She argued that upholding a ruling like that would cause a miscarriage of justice to continue. And she argued that reversing the procedural ruling would open the door for more DNA testing. Once again, the district attorney opposed. Once again, the court ruled for the district attorney. And then I lost the re-argument motion, and then the U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So now my appeals are over. That's 7 appeals. I'm 11 years in.
Wow.
Yeah,
Did you lose hope at any point? Because
yeah. Later on, let me just finish and I'll get to that point.
Oh,
I nearly did. So the only way back in the court is if when your appeals are over, is if you can find some new evidence that probably would have led to a different outcome. And so I wrote letters for 4 years looking for help because I didn't have any money to hire an investigator. So I wrote letters for 4 years, and then I went to the parole board where, in part because I maintained my innocence, and rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, they denied parole. So that last year, then I thought I was going to die in prison at that point. So that's when I really started wavering in terms of, having hope. I mean, but this pen pal that I wrote an ad for in a newspaper, he seemed to arrive at the right time. I mean, I was openly asking the stranger, do you think I should just give up? Should I just going to get out of here? So he played an important role in terms of, my helping me not to quit during that last year where my hope really started to waver. But I want to add that throughout the whole process, even when I was in more hopeful moments, I mean, I constantly had to fight off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up. Even just getting used to being in a prison cell. I mean, all of those things were extremely difficult for me. So it wasn't merely the absence of freedom. I mean, it was all those other things combined. I didn't have very many visitors, so though not literally, for most intents and purposes, I did the time mostly by myself. My grandmother passed away while I was on the inside as well.
were they able to issue you mental health or a medication to help while you were in there, or no?
They were not. I tried a couple of times to get some assistance from mental health, but the mental health professionals working for the Department of Corrections said that they had a really large caseload, and that they had to triage who they were helping, and they had to restrict that to people that were hallucinating or delusional or had much more serious afflictions than what I had. So that's how that turned out.
So, what led to your actual release?
Exoneration. Yeah.
And then we'll go back. I have some questions about when you were doing time, but go ahead.
Okay. So one of the letters that I wrote, this one to a book author in care of a publishing company. Someone at the publishing company instead sent it to an investigator. And when she saw the DNA didn't match me, she believed in my innocence. And she connected me to the Innocence Project. She suggested I write them again. She lobbied them outside the organization. She got other respected legal professionals to lobby them. And then I got lucky that one of the intake workers represented my case several times, eventually getting them to agree to take the case. So getting their representation was the first key. Second key is a district attorney who fought all the appeals and blocked me from getting further testing, Janine Pirro. She left office. Her successor allowed me to get the further testing. And the third thing is we got lucky that the DNA, which already didn't match me, they entered that into the data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator, whose DNA was only there because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case.
Wow.
So
Okay.
on September 20th, 2006, the conviction was overturned. I was released and went back to court November 2nd, 2006, and that's when all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and the actual perpetrator was eventually arrested and convicted of the crime.
Okay. I have a ton of questions.
Fire away.
After your release, well, now let's start with the time. You said there was a lot of gang violence.
Yes.
Do you remember what types of gangs? What
Yeah.
gangs were? Go ahead.
Yeah, there was the Bloods, the Crips, the Latin Kings, the Nietas. Then you had other organizations or groups that I wouldn't consider to be a gang, although sometimes they functioned that way. I mean, you had the 5% Nation, and there was also the Nation of Islam, with the bow ties,
Right.
the Orthodox Muslims, and they even had the collection of the white supremacists who claimed not to be racist, but nobody believed them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they were the weakest group in there, but nonetheless they were there.
Wow. Okay. All right. So what you were sentenced for is very delicate in prison. Were there times where you were assaulted?
There was
How many times?
about 6 or 7.
Wow. And how far did they take it?
Well, I think the worst. I mean, I was just beat up with hands, but the worst part of it was when I got hit on the side of my head multiple times with a 10-pound weight plate.
Wow.
That you might use to like lift.
Yeah, you put on a barbell, right?
That you put on a barbell. Yeah, that was the worst of it.
And how bad were you injured from that?
Bad. I mean, enough that they had to take me to the outside hospital, and maybe the cameras can't see, but I do have scars on my hands as well. And so I mean, I kind of got lucky there. I mean, they, I could have wound up with a prison charge. I mean, they asked myself and the other person, "Do you want to press charges?" And both of us said no. But I mean, that could have went the other way, or they could have picked up the charges. So I mean, that was a element right there. But it was bad enough that the doctors on the outside hospital gave the Department of Corrections personnel instructions that I was to be put in the prison hospital, which was located on the prison grounds, for observations. But instead, the guards put me in they put me in the special housing unit, the SHU, aka the box.
Wow. How bad was the injuries? I mean, were you near death? Was it concussions? Were bones were broke? Skull?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think I was near death, but I think I had a concussion though.
Right, right, right. My God. And was it just various groups of people, or it was one particular group of people
It
that was
was one.
targeting?
Well, it was one person who was like double the size of me, and I did the
Jesus.
best that I could. But frankly, I was just overpowered, and I got my rear end kicked. I mean, I did
Yeah,
the
right.
best that I could, but I was no match for him.
And you still had hope throughout
Yeah.
the first 15 years. Even all this craziness is going on, and everybody's against you. You still had this strong feeling of hope that you are going to get out of here.
Yes.
How how much do you think that helped, as opposed to saying, "Ugh, I give up"?
1,000%. I could. I mean, this latter way, I give up. I still be in there.
Right, 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 right.
There's not a question in my mind that I would still get in there, that I'd still be there. I mean, in terms of how I survived, I mean, I think believing God was one thing, a really
Mm-hmm.
important thing. But another thing was, like I said, I mean, just trying to hold on for the next appeal. I used to go to a law library and learn the law, and that gave a sense of comfort. And I used to collect articles about other people who were exonerated, and I used that as motivation. I found things to throw myself into. So I took the educational programs that they had in prison. I mean, I got the GED, I got an associate's degree, I got a year towards the bachelor's before funding was cut. I did other educational programs. I learned to type. I became a painter's helper. I finished plumbing. I worked in food service. I did teacher's aid. So I didn't take jobs like, being a porter or, working in the laundry. I mean, I did something that I thought had some kind of potential benefit.
Mm-hmm.
From 1998 to 2006, I read 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week.
Wow.
I did some delusions. I mean, they allowed us to purchase the television in the cell in Elmira in 1998. For the most part, my TV stayed off because I was doing legal work and I was reading books. But there were nonetheless some programs that I would watch every week, and I would pretend like I was visiting friends. And when I would play ping pong or basketball or chess, I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so was everyone else. But it wasn't really like kids fooling around on a playground. I mean, I needed to leave the prison for a couple hours, and that was my way of that was the brain's way of doing that.
That was a way of
I
you
listened
coping.
to
Yeah.
sports, yeah. I mean, I listened to sports talk radio, but it wasn't sports talk radio. It was like a more of a lifeline to the outside, and the utilization of euphemisms. Like, it's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent. It's not the guards, it's the correction officers. And I'm not going to my prison assignment, my prison program in the morning and the prison program in the afternoon. I'm going to school or I'm going to work.
Okay.
So all those things happened. The pen pal was another thing. And there was another wrongfully convicted prisoner there named Frank Sterling, a false confession case. It was similar to mine. And so we would meet up every 6 weeks for about 13 and a half years. And we would, half the conversation would be about morale, trying to keep going. And the other half, we would just brainstorm about what was the next move to make. And this, by the way, Frank was ultimately exonerated a couple of years after me, also through DNA testing. So it wasn't that I was just naively believing that someone else was innocent just because I happened to be.
Right,
He
right, right.
actually was. He actually was innocent. Like I,
Okay, good.
yeah, I
Do you
was.
guys still keep
It's
in
always
touch?
important to clarify that.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Do you guys still keep in touch?
Uh, well, we did, but I mean, he passed away after being home for
Oh,
9 years. So
all right. That
unfortunately.
stinks.
But yeah, but
All right.
we did. In fact, I am so happy that he called me a couple of months before he passed, and he was he was close to being in New York, and he said, "Look, I decided to drive to New York, and I want to come hang out and stay with you. I mean, I got a couple dogs with me." Which would pose kind of a challenge because I had cats, but nonetheless, I rolled with it and I let him come, and he had the dogs in the yard, and I'm glad that we did. I'm glad that we did because I mean he passed a couple of months after that. Yeah.
Wow, that's just an amazing story. So when
Well,
beside,
I just want to
good,
add something on that really briefly. Just that
sure.
the lawyer at the Innocence Project, because that's who exonerated him. She called me up and said and said that. that he's coming home 2 days from now. We got the tests, and so I barely missed the train to go the 8 hours up, and so I drove up. I drove the 8 hours up there to Rochester, which is a different part of New York, to be present in the courtroom. So I saw him. I saw him in the courtroom, and when it was done, and they overturned everything, I kind of forgot where I was in the courtroom and the decorum, and I jumped up from the seat and I ran over to where he was. I gave him a big hug and I said, "Yo, we made it, man. We made it.
Yeah, you
We
weren't
made
kidding. You
it."
made it. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I spent the first 4 days of freedom with him, and so that's another memory that I'll never forget.
That's fantastic. So, were you able to have a group of friends in there, or because of what you were arrested for and convicted for, were you basically off limits as far as socializing, joining any groups, or anything like that?
Yeah, I was able to look. I mean, there's the general saying you don't have friends in prison, right? And
Right.
that's like a generalism. That's true. But
Right.
like
Yeah.
most rules or laws, I mean, there's exceptions for that. So
Sure.
I was fortunate that over the years that there were some people that I let within a couple of arms distance, and I would socialize and play sports and shoot the breeze. And a couple of people, a few more, I let a little bit closer than that, and I, you know, told them, what my circumstances were. I would say, in terms of just my being off limits, and that would have been between that would have been between 1996 and the majority of 97. I was transferred from one prison to another one that was closer to the city, but it was like a high concentration of old timers that had really been there for a long time. So that whole vigilante mentality, I mean, was really enmeshed in their psyche. And so, they were all like into each other's business, and people went down to the law library and pulled my case out and made copies of it and passing it around and stapling it on the board. And,
Wow.
it created a very dangerous situation. And at that point, I was off limits to socialize with. I mean, the few people that were not hostile, I mean, um, they were like, well, we really don't want to have problems. So just so for the politics of it, I got to stay away from you.
Right. 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 That's amazing. It's amazing how you stayed strong and hopeful through all this. Because the average person would have probably have given up. But is it true today that they separate the people that are convicted for what you were convicted for
It
from
is
Gen
not.
Pop?
It is not true. No,
No, it's not true. Okay,
no, it's
so
not true. Now they do have the sex offender training program in like certain mediums, and so people that are taking that program at that time, they'll isolate them. So what you're saying is true on that level, but that's just for that period of time. It's not for the rest of the period of time.
okay, all right. So the day that you are released,
Yes.
what's going through your mind? I mean, you've been through hell and back, basically. What's your first day like when you're free?
Wow. So, well, I remember when well, so all right. So I want to take a half step back.
Sure,
we have some time. I want to tell you the story and give your listeners the benefit of
absolutely,
this.
sure.
All right. So the day before I was released, the attorney from the Innocence Project, Nina Morrison, she came up to see me. I never saw her before. I was not expecting a visit, so they opened up my cell, and guards yelled down, Deskovic visit, and so I ran down there and I said, well, look, can you double check? I'm really not expecting a visitor. And so they double checked, and so I ran down to my cell and put my shirt on, because everybody has like a visit room shirt,
Hmm.
you know. So as I'm running down there to try to get in before they start taking the count, because once they start counting, if you're not in the visiting room, you have to stay where you are, and you're going to lose an hour or two from the visit. So I'm hurrying up down there, and I'm thinking to myself, who the hell came to see me? And
Okay.
when I get in the visiting room, this woman is waving her hand like this, and I wave back, but I figure like she's thinks I'm somebody else. I don't know who she is. I'm in Sing Sing now, and I've only been there for this point for 27 days. And So I waved back. I asked the guard, well, who came to see me? And she says, well, don't you know who she points at the visitor and then she says, well, don't you know who came to see you? And so I lied to her and said, yeah, of course I do, because I don't want the visit to be canceled. So
Oh,
I
okay.
so I just I just say that and I walk over and she introduces herself as being my attorney,
Hmm.
and she said, you know, the items have been tested. And I said, you know, well, what do you mean the items have been tested? They're not supposed to be tested for a couple more. From what you told me, they're not supposed to. Yeah. So she says, no, they decided to test them ahead of time. So she said that, you know, it matches the actual perpetrator. You know, you're going home tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not.
Wow.
And we go back and forth 3 times, and you know, then my head starts spinning. All these thoughts are coming. All, all these thoughts are coming in my head, one thought after another,
Hmm.
and one thing has nothing to do with the other. None of them have to do with my going home.
Hmm.
And so she's holding my hands. I'm have this 3.5 hour mental paralysis, right? And every now and then she
Jeez.
cuts in and says, "Are you ready to talk about tomorrow?" And I'm like, "No, listen, just keep that away from me. Not
Wow.
talking about tomorrow. Don't play with me like that. You know, I'm not going home." You know, and what made it real at the end was she said, "Look, the visit's almost over, and we got to get your sizes to get a suit for you, and there's a ton of work to be done with the media." And that made it real. And I felt better for 5 minutes, and then a different thought came in my head, a different fear. I thought something was going to happen between that day and the next. They were going to change their mind, and they were going to do what they always did, which was fight me and win.
Right. Right. Right.
So in terms of the day that I was released, the judge, I came in the courtroom, and I speak to my lawyers, and Barry Scheck leans over and says, "I spoke to the judge in the chamber, and you know, you're definitely going home today." And then this judge rushes out, and my lawyer speaks, and then Scheck speaks, and then the prosecutor speaks, and they're all saying the same thing. And so the judge overturned the conviction, and then he like rushed out, and I had the distinct impression that he really didn't want to have been associated with this in any way, but that he was
Mm.
kind of forced to.
Okay.
So I went to get up and leave, and then suddenly the enormity of the moment uh, hit me, and so I sat down, and and my lawyers are speaking to me, and I'm hearing them and not hearing them. I'm hearing them and not hearing them. And I went on for about 20 minutes. The bailiffs cleared the courtroom. And finally, I felt like it was time. So I got up, and with each step that I took towards the door with nobody stopping me, it got more and more real. As I got ready to leave, there was a court officer there, this African American lady, and she was trying to be professional, but I saw the water was running in her eyes anyway, and I looked up at her, and she said, "Good luck," and I said, "Thank you." And I walked out of the courthouse, and I remember when I went outside, it was just a blue sky. I didn't see any clouds anywhere, and everybody was clapping. And I remember we went to there was a press conference, and it was my turn to speak. First thing I said was, "Is this really happening?" Like
Yeah.
I thought I did it. I thought I finally did it. I finally managed to lose my mind, you know, and
Yeah.
well, I'm going to wake up sooner or later. I'm going to come to, and I'm going to see the prison, the cell walls and the prison bars.
Right. Right. My God. What? Now, was your mom still alive at this point?
My mom, thank God, was still alive at this point.
Is
Yes, and
she
she's
still
still
is she
alive.
still alive today, or she passed?
She is. She is. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, great. So you were
Thank God.
able to, yeah, you were able to be, she was able to,
Mhm.
you were able to go home with her.
I was able to go home with her. Yes.
And at this point, you were what, 30 years old, 32?
32. Yes, 32. That's right.
32. Okay. Wow. All right. How did you make the adjustment from being in prison and the violence and everything that you went through to being in the civilized world again. I mean, did you have to need mental health? I mean, were there times where you were things that you never thought you were afraid of that you became afraid of?
Yes, all of that. Yes, all of that.
Okay.
So I went to see. So for about 6 years, I saw mental health workers four times a week, and there were things I was afraid of. I mean, for example, I mean, I had fear on seeing law enforcement, and I was just kind of like really unsure of what's allowed, what's not allowed. Technology was different: cell phones, GPS, internet that hadn't been created. Culture was different. Neighborhoods looked dissimilar. So cumulatively, those three factors of culture, neighborhood, and technology, I felt like I was in a parallel world that I didn't belong in. It was awkward when I meet up with members of my immediate and extended family who would not come to see me at all, or would come to see me very limited, a lot of time in between, because I knew who they were intellectually, but I was a different person now, and so were they. I had a particularly challenging time because I had never, the years that I had been in prison from 17 to 32, I mean, that particular portion of my life, I mean, I didn't graduate high school. I didn't get to go to prom. I didn't never I didn't have a license before. I had never lived alone. I never went shopping. I never wrote a check. I never balanced a budget. So all those things made, I never went shopping. I mean, all those things had made it really difficult for me as I, lived by myself. I, I lacked stability of housing. I was always passed over for gainful employment. So at one point, I was a couple of weeks away from the homeless shelter, but then Mercy College, which had given me a scholarship to finish the bachelor's degree, they allowed me to live on the campus.
Wow, that's good.
So,
That's
so
great.
that was, yeah, that was great, and that was kind of a intervention. And at the same time, I was having all these difficulties. I simultaneously was doing advocacy work. I mean, I was speaking, and I was a weekly columnist, and so those are the couple of the few ways open to me to make money. And then I was trading privacy for awareness. So I was doing a lot of media, and I was meeting with elected officials. So I was an individual advocate for about 5 years. I got the master's degree as well, because I thought that the extra credential would make me a more effective advocate. I mean, I had tried to go to law school, but I didn't get in. So then I got the master's degree, thinking that extra credential would be good.
What was the master's in and
It was a
bachelor's?
master of arts. It was a master of arts. I studied criminal justice, and my thesis
Ah,
was
okay.
written on wrongful conviction cause and reform.
And your
At the end
bachelor's?
of
What was the bachelor's in?
bachelor's was in behavioral science, which is a psychology degree without
Okay.
taking statistics, and the associates that I had obtained was in liberal arts.
Okay. All right. I have a couple more questions, and I'm going to let you go.
Sure.
The biggest question I have is: did you ever, when you were released, did you ever face that girl's family or
Yes.
or the police officer?
Well, the girl's family. Both. Let me
Okay.
explain. The girls. I used to, when the actual perpetrator made court appearances. I used to go because I considered that he victimized me also, and that she came to court at one of the appearances where I was. She read her victim impact statement, and which included a part of that he was content to just sit back and let me be sacrificed. And then she said that she invited everybody that was involved in what happened to me to bow their heads in shame, which I thought was kind of a powerful thing. And when we were outside the courtroom, the escort officer that was with her came up to me and said that she would like to speak to me. Was I willing to speak to her? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I went over there, and we kind of we had a tearful embrace, and we exchanged contact information, and I wound up spending a couple of weekends with them at their house as their guest.
What did she say to you when you embraced? We could skip it.
I don't. Well, I don't. Well, I don't mind to share it. I don't remember. I don't. I honestly don't remember what was said. But we just.
Okay.
I just remember that we did exchange the information,
Okay.
the phone numbers. So in terms of the officers, I mean, when you sue people, you're not supposed to have interaction with them. So I mean, I was sitting across the table from them during the depositions, in connection with litigation that ensued from, from my wrongful imprisonment. After I got some compensation, I used some of the money to start the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, and with the idea of continuing the advocacy work I did as an individual, but from a nonprofit point of view. We've been able to get 12 people home that were wrongfully imprisoned. Helped pass 3 laws, and then another 6 as part of a key organization within a bigger coalition. And at some point, I became not satisfied with sitting at the in the audience. I wanted to sit at the defense table. I wanted to make some of the arguments and represent some of the clients. So I went to Pace Law School, and I graduated. I became an attorney, and about 40 something days ago, I had my first success as an attorney, being co-counsel in the Andre
Really?
Brown case. We helped overturn Andre's case after 23 years in prison, so he's been home for about 40 something days.
Wow. That first of all, that's fantastic, and I'm glad we're able to end on a very happy note. Because somebody that was in your position could easily have been gone in a different direction. But I'm super happy, and I'm glad that you actually educated yourself and created hope and came out and did something positive. That's just tremendous. How many times, or I don't know if there's any stats available, how often are people wrongfully convicted?
Well, there was a Wayne State study that estimated that 10,000 people were wrongfully convicted each year. So I mean, my case unfortunately is not an aberration. It's happened a lot more often than not lot happens a lot more often than what we would like to think. But just per the National Register of Exonerations, I mean, 3,371 exonerations to date across the country, both in DNA non-DNA cases, just from 1989 forward.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing, man. So, and one more question, then I'm going to let you go because this is a fascinating interview. What about
You muted yourself.
second? How about that? We better?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes.
How about better? Okay. Your personal life, marriage, family, kids, anything like that?
I'm not married, no kids.
Okay.
I've found dating to be difficult, but I'm still optimistic. The background's still kind of a obstacle to that, but I go on dates here and there. I'm still trying to find the right person. It's not
Yeah.
not easy, as you know.
Get yourself a neck tattoo. The girls usually like that.
I might have to pass on that.
Jeffrey, it has been an absolute honor, man, having you on, and I absolutely applaud you and have you in the highest regards and the highest respect that anybody could ever have. You're a tremendous story, and thank you very much for coming on and sharing the story on my podcast. It means a hell of a lot to me, man.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed the interview. And for listeners, I mean, if you like my story, there is a documentary short on Amazon Prime called Conviction, which you could look at as well. And thanks for having me on. This was a really enjoyable interview.
I am going to make sure that link is in the description area so people could just click and go get that Amazon documentary. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.